Good morning. And we now have the opportunity to hear from a keynote speaker, Alain de Botton. But first, let me introduce Alain. He was born in Zurich in Switzerland in 1969 and now lives in London. He is a writer of essayistic books that have been described as a philosophy of everyday life. Alain started writing from a young age, and he's written on love, travel, architecture, and literature. His books have been bestsellers in 30 countries. Alain also started and helps to run a school in London called the School of Life, dedicated to a new vision of education. In January 2014, Alain began an ambitious new project, www.philosophersmail.com, a news website that aims to make us think differently about the news stories we read every day. Updated daily with articles written by a team of philosophers, the site gives current celebrity news and global affairs stories a philosophical analysis, so they become opportunities to think about and understand ourselves in a new way. His latest book, published in February 2014, is titled The News, a User's Manual. As always, we'll leave some time for questions at the end of the session, but please welcome Alain to the stage.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. Today we're going to be talking about work and what it means and why it makes some of us happy and others unhappy and how it's changing. Just quick show of hands. Who here is entirely satisfied, 100% with their working life? Okay, I'm getting the picture. Right, that's why I'm here. The thing is, this question would have sounded entirely unusual about 300 years ago. For most of human history, the idea that work was something that you did in order to enjoy it is a very modern assumption. For most of history, work is suffering. In the Christian state of things, work is a way of paying off the sins of Adam. The philosopher Aristotle, ancient Greek, defined all work that is done for money as slavery. You are a slave if you depend on the money of somebody else. This narrows down the definition of what an enjoyable job might be. We've now moved on into a different world, and that world was born in the period of history we know as the Renaissance, where you get, first of all, a few isolated individuals who do something remarkable. They're being paid, and they're doing something great. People like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, great artists, Bernini, others, great artists of the Renaissance are being paid, and at the same time, their work taps into the deepest part of them, their creative self. And the model that started in the Renaissance is now the model for everybody. Everyone graduating from school and university at some level has got in them that ideology which was born in the Renaissance in the West, which is it's not just money, it's also about being fulfilled. This is a very beautiful ideal. It's got some problems associated with it. I'll come on to those in a minute. It's interesting that the idea that work should be not just for money but also for fun is born just in historical terms, just about a second before another big idea comes along in relation to our love lives. And there, the extraordinary idea is born. This is about the middle of the 18th century here. Remarkable idea is born that you shouldn't just get together with somebody because your land and their land is quite well positioned and you could have some children or their family like your family or whatever. But the remarkable idea comes about that you should find a partner because you like them. You find them attractive, they're nice, you should marry for love. Extraordinary idea, never been done before. And this has become the way that we approach relationships. And it's the same thing. It's necessity being married to pleasure and fulfillment. So we've got these two ideals, working life, love life. In both cases, you marry up the practical bit with the bit that's linked to pleasure and fulfillment. The problem is it's very, very difficult to live like this. Most of us lurch from career crisis to love crisis to career crisis to love crisis. It goes on and on, normally on a Sunday evening. I hope I'm not being to autobiographical. For me, at least, especially as autumn draws in, 5 o'clock, it's absolute pits. That's when the crash between your expectations, your dreams for yourself, and the reality of existence comes smashing together. And but normally by 8 o'clock, it's getting better. But certainly 5, 6, it's a crisis time. It happens to the individual, but it has sociological, historical, philosophical reasons. And I want to look into those. The first question you will face nowadays in the modern world, the first question you always face when you meet a stranger is, what do you do? In the olden days, it used to be other things, like where do you come from? Who were your parents? Now, what do you do? And according to how you answer that question, people are either incredibly pleased and intrigued to see you, or leave you standing there by the nuts and don't want very much to do with you. The reason is that we live in a world of snobs. We live in a very snobbish world. Now, when people hear that word snob, they sometimes think of Downton Abbey and aristocrats and all that sort of thing, and they go, well, I'm not snobbish, I don't care about Lord so-and-so. The bad news is that that kind of snobbery, the kind of Lord and Duke and Duchess thing, is out. No one is a snob like that, but snobbery survives. What is snobbery? Snobbery is really any way of judging another human being whereby you take one aspect of them. If you meet a clothes snob, it's your clothes. If you meet a sports snob, it's how you play sport. But of course, the dominant form of snobbery nowadays is work snobbery. You take that little piece of information and you come to a global conclusion about who that person is, and that conclusion is unbudgeable. So you want to go, look, I'm unemployed, but I'm very nice and I'm complex and I have deep thoughts in the middle of the night. Doesn't matter. You are unemployed. That's it. The opposite of a snob is your mother. Not necessarily your mother or my mother, but as it were, the ideal mother. She doesn't care, how you're doing. She cares who you are, what's going on deep inside you. But most people are not our mothers, and that's why we've got a problem. That's why we are so ambitious. Why are people ambitious? Is it because they're greedy? No, people aren't greedy. We've got this idea in our heads that we live in a very materialistic age. We're all about status symbols, etc. I don't think that's true at all. That's far too mean as an analysis. Really what we hunger for is love and respect and kindness. The love, respect and kindness that we get in relation to how we answer the question, what do you do? So when people are ambitious, it's not really the money they're after. It's the things that flow from the money, the respect, the dignity, etc. If you said to people, look, you'll be paid absolutely nothing, or hardly anything, you'll be paid sort of small plastic chips, but every time you walk into a room, people go, oh my God, I can't believe it, it's him, it's her, it's amazing. Or you can be paid £10 million a year, but when you walk into a room, it's like a criminal has walked in. What do you prefer? Everybody would choose the former option, because really what we want, beyond bare survival, is respect and dignity. And that is what, when we say we live in a materialistic age, really what we mean is we live in an age which has tagged, which has connected emotional rewards to the acquisition of material goods. And that really puts a whole new spin on that whole business of consumption and status seeking. The next time you see somebody driving a Ferrari down the road, don't think, oh, greedy, mean, horrible person, materialistic person. Think this is somebody with an acute desire for love and respect. More than anyone else, they are vulnerable. They think you don't like them. And that's what, who else would need to buy a Ferrari other than someone who felt deeply unacceptable? So there's a real, there's a real poignancy. There's a real poignancy to consumer goods. It's driven by fragility. Let's be kind. The modern world of work, despite recessions and talk of recessions, is changing ever more towards talk of opportunity. This is really the spirit of the modern age. You can do it. You can get it. If you really want, go for it. One of the most successful speakers on the circuit of motivational speaking is a man called Anthony Robbins. If any of you have ever heard of him or heard him in action, he wrote a famous book called Awaken the Giant Within. We're all tiny inside, but there's a giant waiting to come out. And by hearing a talk by Anthony Robbins, buying his tapes, giving your Visa card details, you too can grow into the giant within. And this is a representative spirit of the modern age. You can do it. You can get there. The problem is that we can't all get there. If you go to the aisles of any large, particularly American bookstore, there are, on the self-help shelves, two kinds of titles. The first, the Anthony Robbins kind, you can do it, you make $1 million in 5 minutes, etc. The other kind are teaching you how to cope with what Americans politely call low self-esteem, and we'd call feeling rotten about yourself. There's a real connection between a society that tells people, you can have anything, you can do it, and people who will feel absolutely wretched against the backdrop of constant possibility. The point is, we don't always feel unhappy when we don't have something, but we feel very unhappy if someone told us that we could expect to get it. This is why the idea of equality is an intriguing one. The spirit of the modern age is we're all equal. You know, everyone's born kind of equal. It's not like these people up there and these people down there. We're all kind of equal. Beautiful idea, lovely. The thing is, think about that horrible emotion, but very universal. We all feel it every minute of the day, envy, right? You don't envy everybody. You only envy people that you feel equal to. Take the Queen. It'd be very unusual, I think, for anyone in this room or elsewhere to envy the Queen of England. Because, well, why? She's just too weird. Like, why? You know, she's got big houses, but she doesn't seem our equal because she speaks in an odd way and she's a different generation and she's just like from a different world. So it would never occur you to go, well, I live here and she lives there. Oh, why is that? No, you wouldn't think that. But imagine the typical school reunion. Never go to a school reunion if you want to stay calm. It's the hotbed of terrible anxiety around work. Why? Because these guys really are your equals. They were your equals. You were all equal together. So any difference, the most minute difference, is going to be like a stab to the heart. Never go. So the problem with the modern world is that the spirit is we're all equal. Think of those guys from Google. My goodness, who advises them on how they dress? How do they dress? Sergey and Larry and all these guys. How do they dress? In jeans and T-shirts. That's a real problem because we also dress in jeans and a T-shirt. So it's a real problem because they're worth, 100 billion and we're not. And yet they sort of look the same. And whenever they're interviewed, they always say the same thing. We're just regular. We like barbecuing. We like, we just like camping, etc. And you think, no, this is catastrophe for our feelings of envy. Back in the classical age, think of Louis XIV of France. When you see portraits of Louis XIV of France, he's standing there in an ermine cloak, he's got a golden scepter, he's got a crown on his head, he looks completely weird. It would never occur to you to feel envious of this sort of character. You just think, weird, I'm the serf and that guy's the... But now, we're all equal. Louis XIV would be in jeans, and this is not helpful because we're permanently forced to make these kinds of comparisons. And comparisons work whenever there is a feeling of equality. This is a real problem as we approach the workplace, and it will continue to be an ever bigger problem because that is the spirit of the modern age, a spirit of equality, but a reality, of course, of deep inequality. So when you get the spirit of equality and the reality of inequality, you get a psychological problem. Something else that's problematic about the modern world of work, and getting ever more so, and that is the idea that we live in a fair world. Now, this should be a really good idea. I was listening to speeches in the Labour Party, when the Tories have their conference, a word that keeps coming up is meritocracy. It's a favourite word of politicians. When they say what kind of society they want to build, they say, we're going to be a meritocracy. What does that mean, meritocracy? That means a society where it doesn't matter where you came from, it matters what you do, and if you do well, you work hard, you should be able to get to the top. And that sounds, as we hear it from politicians' mouths, we think, oh, that's great, yeah, bring it on, more meritocracy. There's a nasty sting in the tail to the concept of meritocracy, and here it is. If you genuinely believe in a world where those who get to the top merit to get to the top, you have to believe in a world where those who are or get to the bottom deserve to be at the bottom. In other words, success and failure become deserved according to the ideology of meritocracy. And that's a real problem because it means we have to own everything that happens to us. And that's a real psychological burden. It wasn't always like this. For most of human history, well, it's reflected in language. Back in the olden days, in medieval England, a poor person was known as an unfortunate. Literally, someone not blessed by fortune, by the goddess of fortune, originally a Roman goddess of fortune, an unfortunate. Nowadays, in America, most meritocratically minded place, although the reality is not necessarily that way, but most meritocratically minded place, what do people call people who are not wealthy? Losers. You're a loser. So we've gone from unfortunate to loser, and that's the journey we've gone on through history. In other words, the individual taking ever more responsibility. If I told you, my career's okay, but I've recently been sacked by my publisher. But I said to you, the thing is, it's not really my fault, this is bad luck. You'd go, no, it's not. What's he done wrong? He's done something wrong. That's why they sacked him. We don't believe in luck as an explanatory force nowadays. If somebody says, it was a business, but we just had a bit of bad luck, that's why we're going out of business, you don't believe them because people are meant to own their success. So we've done away with the concept of luck, and we ask people to own what happens to them. And this is psychologically extremely taxing. There's a wonderful French sociologist called Émile Durkheim, writing at the turn of the 19th, 20th centuries. He wrote a famous book called On Suicide. And in this book, he went around the countries of France, UK, Germany, and then also looked at more economically primitive societies. He looked at what we now call Turkey and what we now call Egypt. And he was looking at these different societies. And he came up with a very interesting analysis. And that is that rates of suicide differ hugely according to what society you're in. And the most economically advanced societies tend always to have the highest suicide rates. Now, why is this? Émile Durkheim asked himself. Surely greater material prosperity should be welcomed. But he comes up with an interesting idea. Yes, material prosperity is great, but the price that we've had to pay is an unbelievable increase in individualism, the philosophy of individualism, and a decrease in what he called communitarianism. In other words, the idea that it's the community that comes first and the individual that comes second. We flip that now. The individual comes first, and he or she stands or falls by what they have achieved. It's beautiful if you're doing well, but seriously taxing if you're not. And this is some of the pressure. My theme here is the psychological pressure that goes on behind the world of work. It's not just the flow of money that we need to look at, it's the psychological dynamics beneath the flow of money. And these are very highly pressured. The world of work is challenging in another area. Partly, that's that many of us are in the wrong job. Now, this is kind of painful. Most of us are in jobs chosen for us by our not entirely worldly 16 or 18 or 20-year-old selves, and the cage has shut, and we don't know how to get out of them. The most precious commodity that there is in the world of work is not computers, solar energy, contacts, networks. It's people. It's brains. It's human beings. They are the most important component of an economy. But we haven't really worked out a reliable way of pegging brains to tasks for which those brains are optimally suited. The job of putting people into jobs is at the most primitive level one could imagine. It's roughly at the level of medieval brain surgery. We know roughly how to do it. In medieval times, they kind of understood there was pressure in the head. Why don't we drill a hole? Oh, whoops, he died. In other words, we kind of know, and we have these people called career counselors, and they do their best. And you'll have known the kind of people, they show up at school, they give you, a couple of quick tests, and they say you should be a fireman, or whatever. And it's almost always comedically wrong, and we simply have not cracked this. It's fascinating that there are really two areas, despite our unbelievable love, and you'll know this more than any other professional body, our love of prediction, our attempt to use rationality to understand the uncertain. The two areas where we leave people extraordinarily to their fates are two areas, and I started with these: love and work. If you think of how people choose their partner, oh, I walked into a bar, she looked really nice, oh, he's great, yeah, he plays tennis like me. And on that sort of basis, we fall into obviously quite wrong relationships, and we're surprised. We are surprised. They look so nice after one date. And then the same thing happens with work, that we give the matter a little bit of thought, but not enough, and then we're surprised that we end up in trouble. The goal is to align a brain, a talent, with a task which brings out the greatest strengths and the greatest potential in that brain. We're not getting there. It's very difficult once you're in a job to change it. Imagine the scene: you gather everybody around in your family, you say to them, there's something I've been meaning to tell you for a while. Your sister goes, uh-oh, I always suspected something. And you go, no, it's not that. And your mother runs upstairs screaming, going, no. And you go, no, it really isn't that. It's just that I'm not an accountant, an actuary. I'm a landscape gardener, an opera singer. My true identity has not shone forth, and I want to make a change to my life, to live more honestly by what I think I really am. This is a big kind of conversation to have. Generally, society is not that patient. On the whole, when we have to change jobs, when we feel we have to change careers, we tend to have to lose many of our friends, because they say things like, but I always thought that you were good with money, or I always had you down for somebody in transport. And you go, no, it's all wrong. I'm somebody else. It's very hard to do this in adult life, for all the talk of career change, etc. So the process by which people find their way into careers is at an incredibly primitive level, given where we are. If anyone wants to start a business, to properly put career counseling on a scientific, industrialized footing, there's an enormous opportunity for anyone who wants to tackle that one. So one of the problems is we're possibly in the wrong job. The other problem is we're in a job that looks good on paper, but we're getting a bit bored in that job. And boredom is a striking one, because it sounds like a sort of luxury problem. Oh, I'm getting paid okay, and it's all right, but I'm a bit bored. You think, well, that's nothing to complain about. And on a certain day, you think, oh, that's not for me to complain about. I'm fine, at least I'm getting some money. But if you look at many crises that people have around the workplace in the modern world, they are around a word which is quite hard to define, but it's worth using, and that word is meaning. When people have crises around the work, they often say something like, I can't find the meaning in my work. My work feels a bit meaningless. What are people meaning with that word, meaning? I think that a job becomes meaningful whenever you have a sense that through it you are helping another human being, that you are in some ways either reducing suffering or increasing their pleasure. It could be on a grand scale. You're scooping people up off the road and fixing their hearts after accidents, or it could be a more minor thing. You're baking cakes and you're delivering pleasure that way. We love, as human beings, I allege, to serve others. And you might go, serve? I don't like serving anyone. I don't want to be anyone's servant. But I think it's something absolutely embedded within the individual. We want to serve other humans and our society. And if you look at how children play, I've got a couple of kids, and one of their favorite games is pick up a tray, put some sort of fake food on it, and go around the adults and offer them food. You want to play at serving. And in a kind of a rudimentary form, it's something that I think continues within the individual. We want to make other people happy through our labor. And we've so much been sold the idea of individualism. You're out for yourself, you only want to please yourself. Yes, but we may want to please ourselves, but through a sense that we are helping others. Now, the problem with the modern economy, and it's getting ever worse, is specialization. Now, specialization kicks in as a theory and as a practice in the 18th century. Adam Smith is the first philosopher and economist to pick up on it, famously observes that a group of 20 people making pins can make many more pins in a single day than can one person going through all the different processes. And on the basis of this, industry is split up into small segments, ever smaller segments. The Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto said that you can measure the wealth of a society dependent on the level of specialization that it shows. In other words, a society where a train driver comes home, makes some yogurt, darns some socks, makes their own pizza, that's not going to be a wealthy society. You've got a problem in that society. But if you're buying in the pizza and if you're doing that, then that's a sign that you are a specialized society and that you will be a wealthy society. We know that the UK is wealthy because whenever you go to a party and you say, what do? You hear extraordinary answers. People say, well, I'm a logistics cellophane manager for the Western region. You go, well, what's that? What are you doing? Or I'm sure you get it in your profession. What's that? What do you do? What do you guys do? And you have to explain, etc. In other words, your job didn't exist 200 years ago. And that's why nowadays, your job is in a way spending all your working lives on something which always existed as an area of human concern, but you're doing it in unbelievable focus, with absolute dedication, and with absolute specialization. And it's the way with absolutely any job nowadays in the modern world. There are very few generalists left, and whenever you see a generalist, you have somebody who is economically going to be very not powerful in the job market. So the greater specialization, the wealthier the individual and a society can be. That's all well and good, but there's a problem at the level of meaning. Because the more specialized a series of processes leading to a product is, the more you're likely to lose the sense of meaning. Because meaning really emerges partly from scale and time. I went around, I did a project a few years ago where I was looking at accountancy firms, and I went around an accountancy firm, and I asked everybody what their dream job was. nothing at all practical. Just like, what's your dream? First thought that comes to mind. Most popular result, there were 2 results that were at the top of the list, and they're deliberately rather silly. The first one is running a B&B, and the second one is running a cake shop. Extraordinary popularity of cake shops and B&B. Now, we all know running a cake shop and a B&B is actually a nightmare, but it's a fantasy job. What is the fantasy? And I think that's where it gets interesting, because really the fantasy is that you will be able, in a relatively short time, to serve another individual who you can see, and you can see the effect on them. You know, weary person comes into cake shop, I'm very hungry. Oh, here's a cake I baked at 5 o'clock this morning, it's now 12 o'clock, here it is, they're eating the cake, and you can see the whole cycle of your work within an accurate timescale, and a compressed timescale. We human beings loved compressed timescales. Think of a game of football. Why do we love football? Because it's quite short. If football lasted 3 years, if one match lasted 3 years, we sort of think, oh, it's a bit ragged. I don't know what's going on anymore. I can't really see the picture here. Imagine if the average, why do we like going to the cinema? Because it's quite short. Imagine if cinema lasted 3 years. We think, oh, I can't work out what's going on. What's the plot? We like a compressed time frame. Most of our jobs are like an endless shaggy dog football game where you just can't work out. Most projects that we're engaged in have a time horizon of maybe 2 years, 3 years. Oh, yeah, that should be coming to fruition in the second quarter of 2017. My God, no wonder we're slightly suffering from a sense of loss of meaning when you're thinking of that kind of timescale. Because how does one stay involved? How does one remain motivated over such long stretches? Also, the other thing is, how do you stay involved when you've got such geographical scale? I went to look at a business a while back called United Biscuits. They make Jaffa cakes and all the rest of it. Compare these guys to the cake shop. When you're somebody working at United Biscuits, you're an organization of 30,000 people strung out across the globe. There are literally people whose only responsibility is cellophane. They just do cellophane. They do the cellophane, they transport cellophane, etc. That's their job. Right? It's very unanchored from the ultimate meaning of the job, which is to provide snacks for people at busy times of day. So more and more in the modern world, our jobs still have meaning. Of course they have meaning, because meaning comes from serving somebody and profit comes from serving somebody. So all jobs that are profitable, by definition, are helping somebody along, but the problem is we can't feel and see it. So it's almost like we're not able to tell our story of what we're up to. So some of the crises that individuals have in the modern world of work is they've lost the thread of, like, who am I? What's the bigger story? My advice to any managers is run your team as though you're running a cake shop. Make it feel compressed. Make it feel like the time horizons don't stretch for 5 years, because no one can live like that. No one can get out of bed with that kind of timescale. We are football-loving creatures who like a tight game. Make it feel like a cake shop or a football match. So that's the role of specialization and its problems. Something else about the modern world of work, and this is zooming out from the individual. Let's consider the topic of unemployment. We know that unemployment's coming down, and this is a good thing, and we celebrate when the figures come down. But let me introduce a new term to the equation. I don't want to call it unemployment or employment. It's somehow stuck between the two, and it's what I want to call misemployment. Now, I allege that the rate of misemployment in the UK and other developed economies is enormous, very large. What is misemployment? Misemployment are all the people working in the casino industry, particularly people standing outside casinos handing out leaflets, going, would you like to come into the casino? The person handing out leaflets going, would you like to come inside the casino and gamble? That person is misemployed. In other words, their labor is not contributing to human welfare in any way. And this is a big problem, because there are many, many misemployed people out there. People who are working in the television industry, making terrible television shows about nothing in particular. They are misemployed. Estate agents selling overpriced houses that they don't believe in to people who desperately need quality. They are misemployed. Large sectors of the economy are mired at high levels of misemployment. In other words, the work is not contributing to human welfare and the human good. How can we make sure that, of course, we lower unemployment, but we also lower misemployment? How can we get an economy generally in the world where more and more people are engaged in doing meaningful things? Now, let's think about what government does when it's trying to attack unemployment. What does it do? It tries to do this thing called stimulate demand. And it doesn't really matter for the government what the demand is for. It just wants to stimulate demand. So it prints money, it gives tax breaks, etc., and encourages people to go and spend money on pretty much anything. It has no interest in what the demand is for. And this is a major weakness of capitalism. It doesn't direct people's appetites in any particular direction. In a utopia that I'm sketching and that we're all hopefully moving towards, we will worry not just about demand, but also the quality of demand. What's the demand for? Take the fast food industry. People are always blaming McDonald's and other chains for all the ills of the world. A terrible problem is we're responsible for McDonald's by going there. It's always consumers and their choices that influence what companies are going to be successful and also what the economy is going to look like. Because after all the economy, what we call the economy really is groups of people aiming to satisfy people's desires. Now, what those desires are is the sort of missing piece of the jigsaw that capitalism often doesn't focus on. What we need for a good society is people wanting good things. The more people want good things, what I mean by good is genuinely worthwhile things, genuinely worthwhile television programs, genuinely worthwhile foods, genuinely worthwhile houses, etc. The more there is that sort of demand, the more there will be those sorts of businesses that will cater to that demand. Well, how do we get there? How do we get to better demand? Well, through a term which is very ugly, forgive me, but it's consumer education. We need to educate consumers. 20 years ago, if you were a business that was saying, my fish pies don't contain added salt and all sorts of chemicals in, so please buy them. People wouldn't buy. Your business would go out of business. Now we have consumer education in that narrow field of fish pies. So nowadays, people will reward businesses in the fish pie area that put out material that is of good quality. So there's quality demand. But in lots of areas, there is no high quality demand, and therefore there are no high quality businesses, and therefore there are no high quality jobs. And that's what we need to do in the modern world, to increase the level of quality demand. Remember that famous pyramid? You remember the American psychologist Abraham Maslow came up with a pyramid, called the famous pyramid of needs, in which he tried to group together human needs into different categories. And at the bottom of the pyramid, he placed the needs for food and shelter and simply material survival. And then as you get to the top of the pyramid, it gets more and more psychological. So by the top, it's about the need for fulfillment, friendship, self-understanding, self-development, all sorts of slightly airy-fairy Californian-sounding things. And he basically said, as a society gets more evolved, it will move up the pyramid of needs. So the economy will move up that pyramid. It hasn't necessarily quite happened. It happens a little bit slowly. I mean, the fact is that in the UK, we can support 50,000 people who are working as psychotherapists. Extraordinary. I mean, in a sense, that is quite sophisticated demand. People want to pay for the services of someone called a psychotherapist. It's 50,000. The Church of England, in its heyday, used to employ 200,000 people. So it's still very, very small. We're in a rapidly secularizing society. Where's that priestly function gone? Where's that need to talk to another individual gone, to talk through a problem? Well, currently there is not much demand for it. So in lots of areas of the economy, there is a gap in demand for, as it were, those more evolved, self-development focused aspects of human needs. What is an ideal job? What would work ideally look like for us? Look, I think the ideal job is one where you feel that you can stand back from it and go, that's me. That thing is me. That thing that I have done or been involved with or made with my own hands is me. That's why art has this very, economically, unbelievably unfair hold on the contemporary imagination, the idea of the artist, right? Most of us have no interest in being artists, not much interest in art, and yet we hear so much about artists. Why is this? Because I think that art, the profession of being an artist, captures a deep fantasy, which is, at the end of your career, you point to something that you've made and go, that's me, that's the best of me. Yes, I shouted at my spouse, yes, I haven't always been the best parent, yes, I can be a bit of a mess early in the morning, etc., but that's the best of me. So what we want from our work, I think, is something a little bit like that. A repository for the best sides of us that we that we can sort of collect in one particular place and stand back from and go, that's better than I normally manage to be. If your job is going well, it should be bringing out sides of you that are superior to the sides of you that you can bring out at other moments of your life. You know, sometimes people criticize people for being workaholics. I've got a lot of sympathy for workaholism. People say, oh, they're escaping by working all the time. I can really understand that because life is complicated. And very often work, when it's going well, gives us an opportunity to get it right in a way that we can't in the rest of our lives. The rest of our lives is very, very complicated. But sometimes at work, we can actually put the best of ourselves forward and contribute to something which is, as it were, yeah, more dignified, more sensible, more useful than we are on a Saturday afternoon. On the whole. That said, a few cautionary words about the world of work. Nowadays, we're ever more connected. I don't need to remind you, we're all the time connected to technology and priorities of work. I was thinking about the Sabbath in relation to this. Now, what is the Sabbath about? So traditionally, the idea is you should work for 6 days a week, and then one day you should think about God. You should lay down your tools and think about God. This has become very implausible to many people. Why should you think about God? So in that case, let's keep working. Let's just do it all the time, because why not? There's a very deep truth. You know, what is the Sabbath really about? What is it really about? It's about egomania, and it's about trying to draw us back from the dangers of egomania. What do I mean by egomania? Egomania is the feeling that you, the ego, is in control of everything. And for 5 days a week, it's very easy to think, yeah, I'm in control of everything. I'm in the cockpit of life, I'm pressing buttons, and, you know, I'm keeping the ship steady. Problem is, as we all know, life is, to a large extent, a matter of luck and chance and haphazard events. And the Sabbath, in its original formulation, is a way of saying, you don't control life. God does. Right? So you control a lot of things 5 days a week, but then 1 day a week, no, bow down to a higher authority called, we're going to call it God. Now, I speak to you as a rigid atheist, nevertheless very sympathetic towards many of the maneuvers that religions make. If you don't believe in God, you really need to get interested in religion. Sometimes people think nowadays, oh, I don't believe in God, I'll spare the religions. No, you need to go and study it, because religions know a lot about human nature, which we forget about at our peril. So really what they're arguing is, it's very, very useful to remember you do not control the whole of existence. We live in a world, as I said earlier, about the individualistic philosophy that we live under. It's the idea that we're in control of everything. And religion goes, no, we're not in control of everything. There's somebody else pulling the levers, and let's honor them 1 day a week. We need moments where we acknowledge that actually most of the buttons we're pressing in our working lives are not connected to anything much. Most of the time, we're kind of the victims of very, very haphazard forces. And we need to kind of acknowledge that and face up to that. You know, most societies that have ever lived have had at their center something greater than human beings, something greater even than God, than the king. You know, the king in traditional societies would bow down to God. In traditional Christian coronation ceremonies, the king or queen bows down to God and says, I am the servant of God. In other words, however powerful you may be, there's always somebody who's more powerful, some extraterrestrial divine being. Right? We've done away mostly, especially in the UK, with extraterrestrial divine beings. We don't believe them anymore. Who do we believe in? Extraordinary human beings. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Kim Kardashian. Not joking. These are our extraordinary human beings. It's very punishing to live in a society where you're comparing yourself always to other human beings. How do we break out of it? A few minutes just for a little bit of quick advice. Firstly, go out into nature. Nature's really important. And nowadays, people go, oh, well, you know, I really like the outdoors. It's really good to go for a walk because, you know, it's really good for my body and my aerobic circulation. Nonsense. Who cares about aerobic circulation? You need it for your health, mental health. You need it for your mind. It's no surprise. You know, for hundreds of years, human beings have lived among natural works, the works of nature, trees, etc. It's very surprising and interesting that people only start to notice nature and value it at about the time when the Industrial Revolution gets going. Remember all those romantic poets you might have remembered from school, like Wordsworth and Coleridge? When are they writing? At the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Because suddenly there's a desperate overhyping of the individual and their inventions and their wealth and their power. And suddenly nature people want something new from nature, which is to take them out of the human rat race and to put them into a different kind of context where suddenly it doesn't matter who's on top and who's doing what and who's winning this and that. Suddenly you're in an atmosphere that doesn't care at all about you. And that is the value of nature. It decenters you. It takes you out of the ego and drowns you in a wider sea of kind of otherness. Oh, there's a tree, there's a sheep. The sheep doesn't know anything about my career. He's not going to ask, how are you doing these days? How's it going at work, right? It just is doing its sheep-like things. So encounters with animals, with trees, with streams, with clouds passing overhead, it could all sound very airy-fairy. It's very important for the modern soul in turmoil, the pressures that the modern workplace puts on us. That's one of the great benefits of children. Of course, we think children need us, but we need them. Why do we need them? Because they don't care about lots of things that we care slightly too much about. That's one of the very relaxing things of a kid, at least under 7. Under 7, they don't care what you're doing in your career. They just care about whether you're fun, whether you're able to carry them on your back and play camel and donkey and all the rest of it. And if you can't, you're a boring person, and if you can. So in other words, it's a different kind of value system, an oppressive one. And let's remember, why do we care about failure so much? Because we're afraid of humiliation. The thing that haunts us. I was with a group, I was doing a sort of round table with a group of people from the business world, and it was getting quite late. And I said, we were sort of relaxed mood. And I said, okay, what are you guys all frightened of? What's the thing that you're just frightened of? Just answer that question. And they all said the same thing, failure. And then when I said to them, okay, who do you think of failing in whose eyes? Like, who is tormenting you with that fear of failure? 70% said my father. Right? So there are lots of fathers out there giving people a really hard time psychologically. The father who doesn't approve. We're suffering under that burden. In the modern world, what are we surrounded by? Media, social media. What are media stories generally about? They're either about great success, so-and-so sold their app for $8 billion, we know the problems associated with that kind of story. The other kind of story are telling you of people's failures. So-and-so snorted this, so-and-so slept with this person, so-and-so did this business decision, and now they're out, they're finished, they're crushed, right? And there's an atmosphere of hysteria around failure. We are deeply unforgiving, more unforgiving than we've ever been as a society. And a lot of this is fueled by the media's instant snap judgment against those that it judges have failed. What's a corrective to this? Literature, art, right? What is art? If you look at let's take a step back, look at most novels, most films, what are they about? People who've messed up. People who, if you read their stories in the newspaper, you'd think, loser. But you don't think this because you've read about it in, take the story of Hamlet, right? What is Hamlet? Hamlet's a psychotic killer who goes on the loose in a palace and is a mass murderer, really. Mass murdering weirdo would be the headline. But, when you read about it in Shakespeare, it seems more complex. You kind of understand how people could end up in that sort of a mess. Imagine if you gave, the Daily Mail the story of Sophocles' Oedipus the King, and you said, okay, turn this into a headline. What might they say? Sex with mum was blinding. Something like that. The unfortunate Oedipus and what he did. In other words, there's headlines. It's punishing, it's cruel, and it drives us mad with fear that we will be judged. The number one quality that you need with yourself and with society is, of course, forgiveness. We're all nuts. We're all flawed. We don't much know what's going on. We're maneuvering with imperfect information about ourselves, imperfect information about others. No wonder there's error, an unbelievable loss of treasure and wealth and opportunities all the time, every minute of the day, because as you know more than anyone else, we don't have the right information to make judgments. And on the basis of this, ignorance must come at a psychological level, forgiveness. It has to come from being aware of ourselves as deeply flawed human creatures steering in the dark. I'm going to stop it there. Let's have a chat. Confessions, tearful eruptions, anything you like. But really what I want to end on is particularly just one thing about success. We all want to be successful. Success is the word that is on everybody's mind. If I said to you that there's someone very successful who's going to come on stage in a minute, you'd go, well, which famous rich person is that going to be? But if I showed you a little old lady who was deeply successful at being kind, you'd think, what? Deeply successful at being kind? What's that? The point is, if you look at the word success in the dictionary, it merely means doing something well, succeeding at something. doesn't say what. We have defined that word in a very particular direction. Success in 1300 was being a great monk or nun or soldier. That was success. Success now is having something very impressive on your business card. That is a relative judgment. We all have to live with that judgment, but it's worth bearing in mind just how historically relative. The world of work has changed. It will change again. We can't always control those changes, but what we can control is our psychological armor. And this has, in a sense, been what this talk's been about, trying to develop our psychological armor to meet with the extraordinary challenges of the world of work. Thank you very much. So, anyone have thoughts? I think we can have the lights up.
Thank you for your talk. That was absolutely fascinating. Really interested, you're talking about a lot of the problems that we have coming from attaching our meaning to work and understanding what improves our feelings about that. Would you advocate, having got that knowledge, trying to frame our work and how we think about our work so that we draw more meaning out of it, or would you rather advocate attaching our meaning to something other than work?
That's a really good question. I think we probably need to do a bit of both. How would it work? What would it be like to try and get more of our sense of meaning from our work? As I say, if you're in a business that is making a profit, on the whole, you will be helping humanity in some way. But there is just, because of the scale, there is just such a gap between what the ultimate service is to the customer and your connection with that story. Nowadays, it's become quite fashionable in business to talk about storytelling. People go, we've lost sight of our story. There's a good reason for that, because as organizations develop in scale, so too, they can literally lose the thread of what they're doing. The story they tell themselves. All of us, as we get out of bed in the morning, are telling ourselves some story about why we're doing it. Not we actually say, once upon a time there was a little chap called me, but basically that's what we're doing. We've got a story in our head about why on this day we get up at this time and are doing this thing that we're doing. When people have a crisis, a breakdown, when they can't take it anymore, one way of interpreting that is they've lost sight of their story. They're either not telling themselves a story, or there's a complete disconnect between the life they're leading and the story that they want to tell themselves, etc. There's some kind of narrative problem. And I think we should take that very seriously as individuals and as organizations. But to the second point of your question, which is, could we have meaning outside of work? Look, desperately so, of course we need it. It's one of the massive failures of the modern world not to come up with meanings outside of work that are properly persuasive. The best thing we've got is sport. I used to not follow sport at all, and then I gave birth to a son who's mad about sports, so now I spend all my time going to football matches. Often, as a philosopher, I'm there thinking, okay, well, this is fun, and yet, I don't know. I'm often left feeling that the fans, that if we all got together, we could do something amazing, because we all kind of like each other. We're on the same side, we care about the same things, but at the end of the day, all we did was to kind of put the ball in that goal and put the ball in that goal. And yet I feel that there's so much more potential. You felt it at the Olympics, I think, that in a way it was a pity the Olympics were just about running fast, because there was something beneath it that we almost couldn't quite touch on, which is about being hopeful about our country, about being less suspicious of strangers, about feeling that others could be your friends. They all sound very wishy-washy, because we're constantly, and the media, let's have another crack at them, because boy do they deserve it. If your car breaks down on an isolated Welsh road in the middle of the night, you know that when you go up to the isolated farmhouse and knock at the door, the person who opens the door will kill you. They will chop you in half and put you in the trunk, having raped you before. And the reason that we know this is because we read the Daily Mail and other things, and that's why we know that the world is crazy and everybody in it is horrible. And then, weirdly, there's sometimes moments of communal activity. It snows. We talk to a neighbor. Oh, they're quite nice. Oh, really quite nice. It's amazing, really quite nice. I talked up to a stranger and asked them if I could borrow their thing, and they said, yeah, fine, and give it back tomorrow, etc. And we're constantly surprised. People are really quite nice. Of course they're nice. 99.9% of this country is very, very nice. 99% of this country is lonely and wants to reach out and touch other people's hearts and build a better world, etc. And yet we're all in our little isolated cocoons, competing wildly and pretending we're just mean bastards. But we're not. We're actually very kind and have enormous reserves of kindness and generosity. You know, we go about it the wrong way. Think of taxation. The government says, well, we've got to tax you. And everyone goes, oh, I hate tax. Oh, God, it's disgusting. I don't want to pay tax. Right. And then you go, well, actually, would you like to give some money to some children who are sick? It's that same thing you're doing, right? But one's called tax and we hate it, and the other's called giving money for sick children or people who can't work because they're unable to. And we say, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'll give them some money. So we have labeled all communal impulses something else. We have lost sight of our social generosity, and all there is left is our work. If you want to be a conspiracy theorist, think, yeah, it's done on purpose to keep us isolated, scared, and at our desks. If we realized how much potential loveliness there was, our present lives would become unbearable, we would break the shackles and run into the field singing, and that would be big trouble for modern businesses. I'm not so sure. We can discuss that later. Other thoughts?
Thank you very much for your talk. I wanted to ask you whether you could elaborate a little bit more on when you said people are asked to own their own success, and at the same time we see the shift towards blaming others in our society. So we're not ready, or we don't want to own our own successes or actions or outcome of our actions.
Well, that's very interesting, this idea of blaming other people, because of course politicians have become a lightning rod for this sort of complaint. You know, I'm unhappy, it's the politicians' fault. Now, we know as sensible people that this isn't right, that it wasn't as though David Cameron woke up this morning and said, well, how am I going to make this person's life miserable because I'm a nasty person? It was a series of accidents, of stupidities, of misjudgments, and also that millions of actors are involved in this thing we call national life, that you can't just peg it. But we are obsessed by the idea of saying that person is responsible. And that is precisely the outcome of a kind of root individualism. We believe that the individual can transform group life and do it relatively quickly. So the typical cycle is, there's a chap called Obama, you never heard of him, he's a really nice guy, he's going to change America. And then a few years later, oh, he's so stupid. And there's never been a more stupid person on earth than this man. He's just an idiot every minute of the day. And we get furious with him. And we are encouraged to do this by our friends in the media. A sensible approach would be to say, look, the cycle of economic development, it's normally about a sort of 20-year cycle. If you take technology, the various inputs of labor, transnational trade, etc. Therefore, a chap sitting in the White House, as I say, most of the buttons are disconnected. But we don't have this approach. We have this highly individualized approach. So you've got to own the failure. This debate plays itself out in tax. How much tax should people pay? It depends really on your vision of what contributed to a person's failure or success. Was it the individual or was it the community? And you can dial up or down the tax rate according really to an answer to that piece of philosophy. If you believe that basically it's the community that was responsible, then you have high communal charges, etc. So, yeah, that's what I would say. Look, it's also worth adding, I mean, my own response to this, to the whole sort of philosophy of meritocracy, the idea that you get what you deserve. I'm attracted to St. Augustine, philosopher, Christian theologian, writing in the 4th century, who argued in his great book, The City of God, that it is a sin, strong word, sin, to judge anyone by their post. And what he meant by that is, the post we now call their job. So in other words, if you see somebody who's the emperor or someone who's a slave, etc., if you judge them, if you try and guess what's in their heart, dependent on their post, you're committing, in Augustine's understanding, a sin. And he argued that the only person who can see inside people's hearts and judge their value is God, and he will do this on the day of judgment to the sound of trumpets and the singing of angels. That's a weird answer. But I think that even as atheists, we should take a bit of a leaf from St. Augustine's book, because that's a very useful way of approaching a stranger. To go, look, I don't know what's in that person's heart. I can't see. There is a veil of ignorance between me and this person's heart. So yes, maybe they're the CEO, maybe they're the taxi driver, maybe they're a road sweeper. I can't really tell. And similarly, other people shouldn't tell about me. And so the enemy of all this is snap judgment. The enemy is moralism and snobbery. And this is the thing that pursues us in our nightmares and our fears of humiliation, that we will not be extended a complex form of judgment. So we need these robust things. You know, what the fantasy of being rich and famous, right, is about invulnerability. You arrive at the restaurant and you go, I'm David Beckham. I just am David Beckham. Get me that table. Well, he wouldn't say that. He's a sweet guy. But he'd say, there would be no answer. He wouldn't be relying on the charity of interpretation of others. You'd just be like, I'm David Beckham, to get me that table. So, whereas most of us are in a weak position. It's like, you've got to be nice to me, and I've got nothing to force you to be nice. I've got no gold card, I've got no big name, etc. And most of us are in that environment. We are busy building a society where we don't employ complex judgment in our interactions with others. And that's what keeps us driving and on the treadmill of some of our more extraordinary exertions in the workplace, because we're trying to run away from humiliation. Anyway. I'm rambling, but other thoughts, questions?
Time for one more question, perhaps one at the front here.
Quite a lot of things happen through voluntary organisations. How important do you think this is, and do you think it's on an increasing or a decreasing trend?
That's a really good point, and because it goes right to the heart of what I've been saying, really, which is about money and value. I mean, think about the position of women who stop work when they're having a child. Now, what is it that they're doing? At one level, they're doing something economically insane. They're ejecting from the workplace, massive cut in salary, etc. Right? But looking at it from another point of view, they are doing the most important thing that any human being can do ever, which is to look after a vulnerable, dependent infant. That's the most important thing one can do, and to help to give them a good start in life is literally the most. None of us would be here functioning unless someone had done that for us. So therefore, if we do that for somebody else, that is literally keeping the human race going at a fundamental level. So nothing more important. But how much do you get paid? Actually, surprisingly, nothing. So you are worth, economically, zero. So you're either a really, really important person or a zero. Right? And you get this less extreme variations with jobs like being a nurse. Right? Is being a nurse really, really important, or is it £17,500 plus a few benefits important? Right? Which, how important is it? If we have a society where, I'm starting to sound like Gandhi or something, if you have a society where you can only judge people by one metric, the financial metric, you're going to be in trouble, because lots of things do not make sense under that metric. So, whether it's being a parent or volunteering in an organization, etc. Of course, we have to have a society that is multipolar in its judging systems. There's going to be no escape ever from the race for status, the race for positions in life. But a good society is one where you have a multipolar method of evaluating people. Why was school so horrible? The school was so horrible because there tends to be only one system of judgment. If you're a boy, it's like, are you good at sport? And if you're a girl, are you pretty? Whatever it is. And that is deeply oppressive. A wise society is one that recognizes many different kinds of things. Sure, maybe there is the hierarchy of being good looking. On this hierarchy, so-and-so's doing well, so-and-so's doing less bad. But there's also 12 other hierarchies. There's the hierarchy of being kind, of being thoughtful, of being interested in the countryside, whatever it may be. There can be lots and lots of different hierarchies within a society. The danger is, and this is the danger I think our society is going down, that we find it harder and harder to recognize anything outside the money hierarchy. And this is where voluntary organizations come unstuck, because people think, well, what are you doing if there's no money involved? And many things which are humanly valuable, oddly, do not show up on balance sheets. I mean, as you know, again, more than any other, there's lots of stuff that money leaves out. Money is supposed to track value. Right? And so a balance sheet is supposed to reflect the value of an organization. But we know, anyone who's close to a company and close to its figures, know that there is so much of life that is not in those figures. We tell ourselves that the stock market rose by 0.02% and that's a good thing, or the GDP has fallen by, and that's a bad thing. We know, and economists keep telling us this, but we keep forgetting it. Life is more complex. There are things which slip through the cracks of numbers. There are things we need to hold on to, and if we only respect what numbers respect, we'll be in trouble as a society. So we need to keep doing voluntary work and keep being good parents. I think I'm going to be shunted off the stage now, but thank you so much for listening. It's been a huge pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.